Everyone, if you could put your mics on mute for the presentations. I just want to start out by saying I'm Adrienne Esposito, Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your time and your effort here. This is our fourth annual Clean Water Roundtable, which frankly, I can hardly believe it's gone that far. We have been collaborating and working together for a long time now, but we kind of formalized it about 4 years ago. And what that means, for those of you who are just joining in, is that the water suppliers from around the state, the wastewater operators from around the state, and also the environmental advocates have kind of worked now together on the issues of water. We all work on water. We all want clean water. And there's a lot to be said for collaborating and joining voices for one particular agenda. So we don't always agree on everything, and that's fine, but we do agree on about 80% or maybe 85% of the needs across the state. And it's that 80% and 85% that we write an agenda for. So we've had some great 4 years, $2.5 billion in the budget, which was an historic thing for wastewater, with the commitment for another $2.5 billion. The members of the Clean Water Roundtable really worked aggressively for the new drinking water standards for the 3 emerging contaminants, PFOA, PFOS, 1,4-dioxane, which are now the strongest in the nation. Other states are looking at New York standards, I know particularly in Connecticut and California, and using those as a model or a basis for crafting their own. Funding for water suppliers in the form of grants to upgrade their technology for filtration, for treatment, for attaining the new drinking water standards. And sometimes we went a little outside the box and we agreed on such things as banning plastic bags as something that's also good for, surface water and estuaries and the marine environment. So we've had a lot of successes. We've had a lot of hard work. And I want to thank everyone for their participation. I want to give a special thank you to the advisory committee, which is the New York League of Conservation Voters, Natural Resources Defense Council, environmental advocates, the Nature Conservancy, Scenic Hudson, New York Water and Environmental Association as well, and Riverkeeper, of course. So thank you very much for all of you who've been on the advisory team and put in extra work. We appreciate that. I also just want to announce to folks, we will be having the Clean Water Roundtable, a series of 3 water seminars. The first one will be in January. It'll be geared towards elected officials, particularly some of our new elected officials, but not limited to the new ones, to bring them up to speed on water challenges in New York State and the role that the state legislature needs to play in addressing those challenges. So some of you we will ask to help with giving presentations for that also. And I think that the one thing that maybe we can all agree on, when there's a lot of disagreement, not only in our state, but in our nation, but I think we all agree on the need for clean water. And we all agree on it being a priority for everybody, no matter where they live or what walk of life they come from. So we will be scheduling the first of that water series for sometime in January to help our elected officials gain an understanding through all of your work and efforts and intense knowledge of this issue. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have the presentations first. And because we do have over 50 people on this, event today, we're going to ask that if you're a member of the Water Roundtable and you have a question, just type it into the chat box for the presenter and we'll get that out there. And then at the end, we can have more of an open discussion, but we want to be cognizant of the time and be respectful of your time. So we're going to start with the first presentation, which is drinking, one of our favorite topics. drinking water updates, and Dr. Gary Ginsberg and Roger Sokol from the New York State Health Department are kind enough to be participating with us today. And I know that you guys do not have a PowerPoint, I hear, and you're going to just unmute yourselves and take over.
Thank you, Adrian. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Well, I don't know that we need to say much more. You pretty much covered the MCLs.
You better say much more.
And, just the fact that we are happy that we were able to roll those out, get them promulgated August 26th, in the middle of what is unprecedented times for us at the health department. COVID has been, even for the Center for Environmental Health, where, we think of what we do in Bureau of Water Supply Protection, what we do in other aspects of our operations as being more about, the greater perhaps chemical affected environment, or the kinds of issues we're talking about today. But there's so much more that CEH and Bureau of Water Supplies has to deal with during a pandemic to make sure that the infrastructure is going to work well during all the pandemic type of issues. So we've been inspecting our inspections for executive order enforcement of restaurants, bars, and beaches, supermarkets, farms, migrant farm worker housing. I mean, we're doing things I would have never dreamed about that we would have to do to be, trying to keep New York State from getting as much of a second wave as we are getting, unfortunately. So that's just the backdrop to say that rolling out the MCLs, which in itself is a substantial lift, to coordinate with local health departments as well as our bureau and regional and district offices in getting the water supplies all aware of exactly what the MCL promulgation means to them in terms of the testing requirements, the reporting requirements, and then if there are exceedances, what the next steps are, what the deferral process is. Public notification is hugely important. And so we've been putting together a communication package that has gone out to water supplies, the operators, as well as to local health departments to make sure that this rollout, this sort of transition to cleaner drinking water goes as smoothly and as uniformly as possible. And so that's largely the work that we have been doing leading up to August 26th promulgation of the MCLs, as well as in the weeks and months that have followed. So, I'm just talking, right now a little bit about that. Roger will follow in behind me to, fill in some other topics in our 10 minutes. But please, if you can give us like a 2 or 3 minute heads up when we're running out of time, I'd appreciate it. So, the promulgation, so the first round of water supply testing was due to be tested. The first round of water supplies, I'm sorry, the largest ones were meant to be tested at the end of October. Second wave for the mid-size supplies right around the end of this month. Any deferrals would need to come in again by the end of this month, I believe November 26th. And so we are starting to get data. The smallest supplies would be at the end of February. We are, these data are being entered into SIDWIS, which is our electronic data reporting system. We are, starting to see some deferrals come in. Again, the deadline isn't for another couple of weeks, so we expect this to be fully, transparent. We'll expect to see exactly where we stand with the deferrals in a couple of weeks. So that's pretty much the update of where we stand now with the MCL rollout. I also wanted to mention the Drinking Water Quality Council, which is really important for us to continue that process. It's regulatory requirement, as well as really important to the health department to have that external advisory group that is very engaged with drinking water and emerging contaminants to advise us. We haven't had a meeting, we realized, since last January, and we are looking to schedule one within the next month or two. And the agenda items for that, and there will be obviously notification not only of the date to this group and the public, but also of the agenda. But it's going to be a resetting of the council to update everyone and get everyone back on the same page in terms of what we're accomplishing, where we were at the last meeting, and focus on the additional perfluorinated compounds, and provide some updated information about the occurrence of those. And so we hope to be able to have that meeting, as I said, in the next 30 to 60 days.
So Roger, can I just ask about the notification though? Because if you put out a notice, would you kindly get it to me and I can disseminate it to the Clean Water Roundtable folks? That would be terrific.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I think I'll turn it over to Roger. By the way, Adrian, that was Gary speaking, but now I'm going to turn it over. Now I'm going to turn it over to Roger, Dr. Sokol, for a couple of other topics we've been working on. Again, a lot of things that we're doing are affected by COVID, and you'll hear that in Roger's brief presentation as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary, and good morning, everyone. Appreciate being here with this group again. I will just maybe reiterate again something that Gary said, is that, I think the department in trying to roll out the MCLs during the pandemic did do a lot of work in trying to get information together. And I do notice on the call today that we have several members of the New York section of the American Water Works Association. Also like to sort of thank them in many ways, because we did make use of AWWA as a forum to hold a WebEx to be able to reach as many water suppliers as possible in New York State, to be able to provide them with information and help guide them through the new regulatory sort of process. So I did just want to mention that in addition to what Gary said. Also, something that I think we talked about last time, and there was some interest in this group, is the requirements now in New York State for schools to actually test for lead in their buildings in drinking water. And this year was the year that schools would also have to do their, if you will, second round of at-the-tap testing for lead in their buildings. And as Gary had mentioned, one of the things that everyone's been involved with COVID, and even on the school level, has sort of led us to extend the monitoring period that the schools would have to complete this. Currently, the monitoring period was set to end at the end of this year. Given all the complications that the schools are having to do with trying to go back to school, many schools are either not fully in session or partly in session. It was recognized that the buildings themselves were not being used in a normal way. And also we were trying to provide some flexibility to the schools to make sure that they accurately do the testing. And so the monitoring period was administratively extended out until June of 2021. So we're not necessarily deferring anything, we're just providing the school districts throughout New York State sort of a little bit more time, really in recognition of everything that they're trying to go through as well in terms of COVID. The other thing that we've been sort of actively involved with, and might be of interest to this group, it's not really drinking water related, but it is related to wastewater. We did sort of partner with DEC, and we did put together what we're calling sort of a state pilot looking to monitor for the virus that causes COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, in wastewater. And we were able to support a pilot testing of wastewater in 4 cities throughout New York State. So Newburgh, Albany, Syracuse, and Buffalo. And this pilot was actually run by a consortium out of Syracuse, which comprised of Syracuse University, SUNY ESF, Upstate Medical, the engineering firm Arcadis, and a small private upstart analytical laboratory, Quadrant Biosciences, which was also located in Syracuse. And what this pilot attempted to do, and actually did do, was do an intensified sampling for the virus within these 4 cities' wastewater systems for a period of a month. So essentially from the end of August through September, sampling of not only the water that entered into the wastewater treatment plant, but we were also able to look at what we called smaller sewer sheds throughout each of these cities. And ultimately, I think what we're looking to do is sort of develop best practices in terms of how we potentially could expand such a monitoring system throughout New York State in some way that would allow to provide some additional surveillance information that could be used by local public health officials to sort of monitor for what the state of transmission in many ways might be going on in their communities for the virus. And so, again, just wanted to maybe highlight that a little bit for this group here. While it's not necessarily drinking water, it is sort of wastewater in a very unique way of sort of making use of wastewater from a public health sort of perspective. So that is sort of my update for today.
When will you have the results of that?
So the consortium is working on essentially putting together a series of what we call sort of white papers, and we hope to have those sort of very shortly. Anecdotally, what we've seen elsewhere, and even in this study, is that the analysis of wastewater can provide sort of a 3 to say 7 day heads up before we really start to see a large increase of actual clinical cases within the sewer shed. But again, there's a lot of other variables that go into this, understanding how to collect the samples, when to collect the samples, data analysis. So a lot of this pilot was really trying to answer a lot of unknown questions and to help better define or refine some sampling methodologies and even interpretation of the data. So we do hope to have some more information more widely available in the coming weeks and months.
Okay. Question in the chat for DOH. Is DOH considering lowering lead action levels for schools to 5 ppb?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We are working on children's blood lead on a wide range of fronts in terms of both, catching up and staying on top of the children's blood lead data, because we've recently lowered the target blood lead threshold to 5 micrograms per deciliter as our action item for both environmental investigation as well as initial interventions. And so that in itself is a large workload to stay on top of, including trying to work more aggressively on the prevention agenda, and those and that largely again surrounds housing and lead paint. And so our work on trying to reduce children's blood lead has been really focused on what seems to be the primary source and, lowering the action level for schools from 15 down to 5. We know that the EPA has also talked about the action level, and we've been reviewing their proposed changes to the lead and copper rule. And so that's all part of, the mix of considerations and approaches for, taking, again, increasingly aggressive stances towards children's blood lead. But we know that getting the taps at schools tested and under control is an important point. And, we're, again, not just because we're administratively pushing out the deadline does not mean that we are, not serious about making sure that all those schools are at least at 15 or hopefully below. But no, we're not right now looking at formally trying to create our own drinking water approach to lowering the level. Again, that's a much bigger discussion, and would have a lot of other considerations, including what the lead and copper rule is going to look like from EPA as it goes forward.
Okay, I'm going to just do 2 more questions because we're getting wrapped in time. The first one is by Dan. Hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, is this for the health department, Dan? Well, I'll just read it. What will the process and timeline be for approving Cuyahoga County's draft watershed rules and regulations for Oswego Lake?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a topic that we have been reviewing with some of the other agencies involved. We have seen the draft rules and regs revisions, and we are just now looking at exactly what they entail, and we're talking with some of the other state agencies involved. So, this is something that in the coming months that we are going to have to get back to Cuyahoga County on and enter into that rules revisions dialogue about exactly what is going to be the final package going forward. So it's certainly in our crosshairs right now at the moment.
Okay. The last one, and I know you kind of answered this in the beginning. You said that the water suppliers have until, what did I write down here? You have until end of February. No, I'm sorry. Deferrals, November 25th. So will you be able to tell us at some point how many water suppliers have requested the deferrals to the MCLs? And then at some point, how many deferrals were granted? Will this be transparent and open to the public information?
So the deferrals will be coming in over time, and we'll have a pretty good idea by the end of the year, early next year. So we will look at opportunities for making that information more available. I mean, we have the Know Your New York Water website, which is, we are planning to update. Right now it has the annual water quality reports, but to really increase the amount of information that consumers will have, as well as other stakeholders will have about drinking water quality and any exceedances. That's our main place that we hope to put this kind of information. So in the short term, right now, we're just trying to stay on top of the deferrals and look at which ones have merit, and the approval process is going to go forward in conjunction with local health departments, and exactly how we transmit that. We're still working on that, but we certainly hear the need for that to be transparent. Okay.
I'm going to take the liberty of doing one more question. I'm going to ask this one, but also in a more general context. And that is that this question is: news recently broke that there's an exceedance of the MCL in Rockland County for the water system managed by Suez message from the county health department was referring to EPA's advisory standard rather than New York State's new MCL. And we've had a situation here on Long Island where the Navy was only referring to the 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS and didn't want to do anything more for remediation. That was just last week, and was ignoring the state's new MCL. So what is the state doing for messaging or making sure that the new MCL is getting out there to not only this particular county health department in Rockland, but to other remediation efforts?
Yeah, so, there's a great point, and, thanks for bringing up the Rockland County situation. We think it's a good example of how the process is working to identify exceedances that we didn't know about before. The Suez supply was tested during UCMR 3, but, the limits of detection were too high then to see these detects. So now we know about them. And Suez was proactive in putting out their required notification language. They were actually doing it ahead of time rather than, waiting for the local health department or the state health department to provide, any sort of prompts about that. And their language, we have mandatory health effects language that we provide to them in a template. Exactly how they word it around that is somewhat up to them. Yeah, we are not, and our messaging has been, an exceedance is relative to the 10 parts per trillion level for PFOA. I believe that was the compound there was PFOA. It's about an exceedance of 10 parts per trillion. It's, the 70 parts per trillion number is something that EPA, has as a health advisory in 2016. And both the local health department and the water supplier know that it is one reference point from which to see the level of, that the New York State level is, more protective than what the EPA has done. But it is not, any kind of decision point here in New York State, and that they need to come down to 10 parts per trillion, as soon as is feasible based upon getting granular activated carbon on their wells. So, we're not encouraging people to reference the 70 parts per trillion level, but we realize that some people may do that.
Okay, we're going to move on, but I just want to say as a commercial announcement, I think we're all looking forward to the day when the EPA goes back to being the EPA. Okay, so it's funny, all the heads are nodding now. We're going to move on. And thank you so much to both of you for participating. We always appreciate the Department of Health's participation and the information. And we look forward to working with you on more MCLs. And please let us know when the next meeting for the Drinking Water Council is scheduled. Thank you again. Okay, our next presentation is by the infamous and one and only James Tierney with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Jim's going to give us an update on where is the money going. No, New York State's Clean Water Infrastructure Program, and actually where has the money been going and what does he see happening next also. Jim, happy to have you.
Oh, Adrian, thank you. And I'm very sorry, I've run into some technical difficulties, so I have to be a disembodied voice on this call today. And I just want to say thank you. I'm looking at the people who are engaged today. It's a real all-star cast. And I just want to start out with something just very personal, which is a real, true, heartfelt thanks for all you do. I'm glad that you're keeping it going during these very difficult times, but it really comes from a place of being an environmentalist myself, a water guy for years, and realizing that so many things happen because of what you do, and collectively, members of this roundtable make happen. So thank you. And as Adrian said, my topic is clean water infrastructure. I have a lot to talk about. I'll try and roll through it fairly quickly. But just in case people have any particular questions or concerns that they want to raise offline directly to me, let me give you my phone number. It's area code 518-402-2794. I know a lot of you know how to use it, have that already, but just in case I've missed somebody, that's how you can get in touch with me. Now, one thing I just want to start with, is a lot of people know that the Clean Water Act, originally, the Federal Clean Water Act, was as much about clean water funding and drinking water funding for infrastructure as it was about setting up a regulatory program. And the regulatory program has remained, but the funding largely was diminished. It really turned into loans over a period of years. I think that's a progression that a number of you know. And I want to start with a proverb that I always use when talking to staff about clean water infrastructure, and it's that today's progress was yesterday's plan. And so a critical element, and one of the things that we're doing very carefully here at DEC, and often with our friends at the Department of Health, is effective clean water infrastructure, happens based on effective engineering and action planning. It sets the stage for political support. It helps you get your hands on the money. It also makes sure that science is brought to bear on decisions on how these funds are used. And I consider these funds really precious, and I want to make sure they're maximized given the scope of work that needs to be done for clean water infrastructure. Many of you are familiar with the global sort of planning that we do, known as total maximum daily loads. A better word for this might be pollution budgets within a particular watershed in order to reverse a violation of a water quality standard. In areas where most of the pollution comes from polluted runoff, we do a shorter version, but very effective version known as 9-element plans. And these are approved by EPA, so they really give you global water quality targets that we have to aim and build the plans and programs around. And there's many famous examples: Chesapeake Bay, which covers the basin covers about 13% of New York State, Long Island Sound, Chautauqua Lake, Lake Champlain and beyond. We have many of these. And we also have many 9-element plans all around the state. One thing I just want to point out is we also have planning programs like the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan. And that's Suffolk County, DEC, Nassau County, Long Island Regional Planning Council. Many of the partners on this phone, Adrian, I know you've been involved in LINAP and development of that for years, Dr. Gobler at SUNY Stony Brook and the like. And just want to give you the type of thing that's growing out of these initiatives. Of course, in that case, for nitrogen pollution, in Suffolk County has completed this extensive sub-watershed plan for nitrogen for well over 100 sub-watersheds within the county. It's been reviewed and approved by New York State DEC as a formal 9-element plan. And there, not only is the goal water quality standard compliance, but it's actually ecological recovery. And I know Adrian and the Nature Conservancy and others made a terrific case early on. Don't just shoot for compliance with water quality standards. What's your purpose, Jim? Your purpose is to bring the resource back. And that's, I'm very proud of the fact we've done it. It's very ambitious, but we're going to get it done at some point through investment over the long term. Of course, there's lots of enforcement, a lot of orders, lots of permits. For example, every combined sewer overflow and sanitary sewer overflow that exists in New York State is under a very specific binding consent order to abate those raw sewage overflows. We have the sewage pollution right to know law, all that type of infrastructure in place. But then turning it even further into planning, which I want to emphasize because it is so important to making the pipeline of projects actually happen. We have engineering planning grants that we've developed over the period of the last number of years. It's been about $3 million. We get about 100 engineering reports out of it, mostly by hard-pressed hardship communities. And what does this do? It prepares sort of a 10% design. Think of it as an engineering report. Why do we do that? Well, most communities don't want to spend the $30,000, $50,000, or $100,000 in order to prepare the engineering report that's a necessary component of an application for funding, either the New York State DEC or to the terrific Environmental Facilities Corporation. So what we're basically doing through this engineering planning grant program is paying communities to understand and submit an application for funding. That's part of the project pipeline. So broader plan, more specific engineering plan. And we've also developed something that I'm personally really excited about, a non-point planning grant program. What does that mean? Think of it as an engineering planning grant program for green infrastructure, flood resiliency, habitat restoration, actions on the landscape that restore the overall water quality and ecology of our water bodies. You can see how this would flow into improved projects that are proposed for the Green Innovation Grant Program from EFC. Also, the Restore Mother Nature Bond Act, it would set the stage where for the intelligent use of funds that at some point will become available. I'm not making any announcements through the Restore Mother Nature Bond Act. It helps with the intelligent use of that. And it's beyond engineering, it's also landscape architecture, green infrastructure, and the like, both in the urban and rural environment. Another thing that we've developed is we're spending all this money on clean water infrastructure assets. We've developed a program for asset management plans. We piloted a first $3 million program with 11 diverse communities to say, what is a state of good repair? How do you maintain it? How do you maintain each major piece of infrastructure? What's its status? When is it going to wear out? What do you do to keep it from failing? What do you do to keep a pump blowing out and raw sewage blowing into the East River in New York City? That type of thing. And it gets us away from the idea of, that once was said to me by a public works commissioner, we fix it when it breaks. That's the absolute worst answer you can get. It's also very cost ineffective. We want to take the infrastructure that normally would last 25 years and get it out to 35 years. We want to make sure it's effective. And then when the time is up for it to be replaced, we know that it needs to be replaced, and hopefully the funding is in place to do that. So along with this asset management plan, all these water infrastructure assets, we also have them look at rates, needed funds, make sure their sewer rates are at a level that comports with what they need to maintain this incredibly important public, infrastructure, incredibly valuable. Now, on the asset management plan, we also include resiliency. So part and parcel of the program, and we hope to have a phase 2 that we'll announce publicly very soon, where we want you not only to look at the wastewater infrastructure, but what are the flood risks associated with that wastewater infrastructure, and then how do you adapt to it? Because a lot of sewage infrastructure is located in hydraulically low points because it aids drainage, and that puts it at increased flood risk, riverine and coastal. One question I have that we're exploring right now as part of the Community Risk and Resiliency Act program and the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is whether we need to have sort of this asset management process. It's really an engineering process. Should we do it for wastewater treatment plant energy efficiency? Should we do it for wastewater treatment plant energy generation from biogas? Is there a way to make a lot of our wastewater treatment plants actual, clean, renewable energy generators? And that's something that's a question that's being asked around here and by a number of people, including a number of people on this line. And then in keeping with the action plans, I mentioned LINAP, Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, but we also have the harmful algal bloom action plans that we did and learned a lot of in 12 priority lakes around the state of New York. And there's a lot of other studies and analyses going on, but those are fairly detailed plans about what do you do, what can you do in order to bring back a lake. And I know that Jackie Lindrum is on, and she's going to give you an update on the overall harmful algal bloom, the HABs initiative that we have underway. Keeping with the planning phase, we also have an initiative underway that was announced in the State of the State known as the Resilient New York Stream Program. And we have 61 studies underway. Basically, think of them as state-of-the-art studies, very quantitative, not sort of the qualitative mush that used to drive me nuts. It's very quantitative, hydraulic models, hydrologic models, to say, okay, what is this causing flooding within a particular sub-watershed? And what do you have to do very specifically in order to address that flooding? So you actually come back after 3 or 4 months with a plan that says, here are 15 or 20 things you can do, Supervisor Jones, in your community in order to abate flooding along this stream, this stream that's experienced flooding for a period of years. And we're actually doing this right now, it's very exciting, for the entire main stem of the Mohawk River. So that plan is underway. It's going on, a lot of community engagement and plan in those processes to figure out what it is. But frequently we're surprised. We find out that it's a bridge that's causing, 5 feet of water to flow down Main Street. A DOT bridge. Hey, DOT, expand your bridge. Culvert backups, all sorts of other things. But beyond dealing with flooding, and the goal is to at least abate the 100-year flood level with an increment for climate change that we use, but it's also to do a lot of habitat restoration. So a lot of floodplain restoration and reconnection. And just to give you some sense how all these plans tend to draw funding and draw political support, an example I like to use is the Sequoia Creek plan that we did, where to date, that's up near Utica, it's a south to north stream near Utica. To date, we did the plan with the community, but they've also already gotten $8 million in grants, cobbled together from a variety of sources in order to take an area that's flooded 31 times of record and make it so that it won't flood during the 100-year storm, accounting for about a 30% increase in storm flows due to climate change. So we still need to take those projects and go through the engineering planning process, but that gives, which we're doing, but it gives you a sense of how, with funds from Restore Mother Nature or from the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, like, you're using them wisely to holistically go about helping communities. The other thing that we're doing with our friends at the Department of Health is we're very far along on a drinking water source protection program. Many of you might remember back in the early 90s that the source water assessment plans that basically said, oh, there's risks in this watershed, there's risks to your wellhead, there's risks to your reservoir, that type of thing. But we're going to the next level. It's not only what are the risks to your drinking water supply on the landscape, but what do you do about it? What specifically can you do? And we have funding available, Environmental Protection Fund funding, and that again will identify projects in cooperation with the local community that can be done. And people from the North Country is something that took over my life for a summer. The Regional Economic, the Resiliency and Economic Development Initiative, due to flooding, along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. Record floods in 2017, only to be outdone by record floods in 2019. The governor set up a $300 million program. DEC is involved in 132 projects along the coast, many of coastal green infrastructure. But the reason I'm raising that, $60 million of that $300 million approximately is going to clean water infrastructure along our north coast. So that's just want to give you that sense. I know Julie Tai is going to be talking about the budget battles and the like, but so far, and I'm very grateful for this, $4.4 billion has been appropriated under various iterations of the Clean Water Infrastructure Act since 2015. We have to spend this wisely. And I note that for every every $10 million invested in clean water infrastructure, the Environmental Facilities Corporation's economic model says 160 jobs are created. So it is a jobs program, it is a stimulus program. Now, beyond the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, you also have the $300 million annual Environmental Protection Fund. A lot of that goes to either infrastructure projects or infrastructure planning. It's very important. We also do work on septics, green infrastructure, and to date, some 7,000 acres of riparian land are set to be acquired as part of that overall program for source water protection. So New York State, and I deal with a lot of people around in water issues across the country. When it comes to infrastructure funding for clean water, we're the envy of the nation. There's nobody else who has anything like New York in place. And so, our leadership, our elected leadership in the state has done a great job of making that a priority, I'm sure with a lot of assistance of the folks on this phone call. The other thing is, I just want to mention, I look under every rock for funding. And the reason is there's an old Dutch proverb that, funding water issues are funding issues. The Dutch have been dealing with water quality problems and flooding since the 1600s. It's actually a Dutch proverb. And so I look under every rock, and we work as a state work to do that. So for example, we have $810 million in federal post-Sandy funds going to upgrade the Bay Park wastewater treatment plant, which was in terrible shape prior to Sandy and needed a complete A to Z rebuild. So that's nearly done. That $810 million rebuild is done with resiliency against the 500-year flood. The Long Beach wastewater treatment plant, we managed to get at least, and I'm looking for more, $76.9 million in FEMA funds to the Bay Park Conveyance Project. Bay Park Conveyance Project, $76.9 million. The Long Beach wastewater treatment plant, we've secured $24 million from HUD in Sandy funds. And the South Shore Suffolk County sewer project, well over $250 million in federal Sandy funds have been dedicated to that. So we're trying to get our hands on the overall funding. If people have specific questions about the amount of money that's gone to Hab's abatement projects, the amount of money that's gone to LINAP abatement projects, Long Island Nitrogen Action, I can get you those numbers. But we've completed the Binghamton Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. We've completed the same program for Oswego, Utica, Oneida, Albany, all going very well. And another thing I just want to note, since DOH is on the call, is you should take a look at the National Academy of Sciences report on the New York City watershed. That whole program started in the mid-90s. The state of New York can take a victory lap on how effectively they've done a source water protection program for the New York City drinking water supply to maintain it as a very cost-effective, unfiltered source of drinking water. One last thought before I stop. Geographic programs. What are these? The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the Chesapeake Bay Basin Program, the Long Island Sound Study, the Lake Champlain Opportunities for Action. All of these basins get funding from the federal government, many of which I know you go to Washington and you ask for more funds or adequate funds for these programs. They're invaluable to us in getting our job done. One question I want to leave with you with is, while we have geographic programs for these major areas of New York, and they're all over the country, I mean, San Francisco Bay, Puget Sound, and like, we don't have such a program for the Hudson Raritan Estuary. And it's sort of an astounding gap to me that on the federal level, we have, $350 million Great Lakes Restoration Fund, $85 million Chesapeake Bay program, $20+ million Long Island Sound program, but the Hudson Raritan gets nothing. So I'll leave you with that. And again, give me a call if you have any specific questions, or I can take a few questions now if you have time, Adrian. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jim. We do have a couple of questions coming in. I'm going to do them very quickly. The first is from Suffolk legislator Bridget Fleming. Does the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan provide funding for communities that rely on private residential wells, where some, example is Long Island, where funding is needed to connect to homes to public water?
There's a grant program available through the annual combined funding application, where we do fund the connection of individual drinking water wells with problems to public water supplies. There's a fair amount of that going on in Suffolk County, and not so much in Nassau. Nassau is mostly connected. So while we don't have, the source water protection program right now is set up to address a drinking water source protection program set up for municipal systems. The municipal system certainly could look around and see, as part of that planning process, other people at risk. The other thing we do in conjunction with a lot of municipalities right now, when in the context of PFOA, PFOS, and 1,4-dioxane, when DEC or DOH from like an old landfill or an old Superfund site or some other type of discharge, if we come up with a problem that in an area, we look around for all the drinking water wells, private drinking water wells in the area, and have to figure out some way to get that treated. Generally, the preferred way would be if we can hook them up to a public water supply, that's great. If not, some more remote locations, we do individual treatment systems, usually carbon filtration for PFOA or PFOS right at the house. Thanks.
Okay, real quick, just yes or no. Can we just confirm that what you said was, as far as the statistic, that for every 10 million, that EFC has said, for every $10 million invested in water infrastructure, 160 jobs are created?
Confirmed.
Okay, thank you. And last, Tracy Brown, are we on track to continue getting $500 million out the door annually for the Clean Water Infrastructure Act funds? And when will the next round of grants be announced?
Tracy, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know when, given the financial circumstances in the state, we don't know when that will happen. I think a lot of that is frankly just contingent on what happens with the next stimulus plan in Washington, D.C. I think everybody knows about the tens of billions of dollars of deficits projected over the next 4 years if we don't get some assistance to help New York and many other states and municipalities out. So no word yet, Tracy. Thanks.
I mean, just Jim, as I'm sure you know, that we all hear when we lobby on this, that it's use it or lose it for these funds, and we hear from the legislators if the money's being sent out to the communities, and if not, it just makes it harder to protect it.
Okay, no, it's understood. Now the money, huge amounts of money is going out, and what I can tell you is, all the bills that are coming in for grants awarded here at DEC, we're paying them. So, the bill, we're getting from, a grant from 2017 or 2018 or 2016 or 2019. When we get a bill from a municipality to under the Water Quality Improvement Project program, we're paying the bills. We're actually up to date on making those payments.
And that's actually good to know. And this is not a question in the chat, but I'm going to pretend that it is. And what about those grants to water suppliers for being able to comply with the new MCLs? Are they still going out the door? Are they still available to the water suppliers?
My understanding is yes, but Roger, I know, is on the line of DOH. If he's still on the line, he'd be able to. Department of Health manages that program directly, so I want to maybe defer to them if it's all right with you, Adrian.
Sure, Jim. Yes, the grants that have been awarded, as you know, we work with EFC, and yes, dollars are going out the door.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much again, Jim. We always appreciate your time and your work. We have to move on, but thank you again.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Okay. Speaking of DEC, we now have, I think, our state's expert on harmful algal blooms, who's going to talk about, this is actually a good follow-up, some of the programs that Jim just talked about on addressing harmful algal blooms with the action plans that have been developed by DEC. So we have Dr. Jacqueline Lendrum here today to give us an update on Hobbs.
Hey, hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I do have a couple of PowerPoint slides that my crew put together just to show you some pretty pictures. I think Brian's going to put them up unless you want me to try to grab the screen.
You could just put it up. You're
okay.
Sure, your screen is available.
Okay. Share. Okay. Bear with me then a moment while I.
Just your reminder that Jackie's a farmer and she has a picture, she has a tractor behind her.
I do have a tractor behind me, and
Oh, yes.
I do. Okay. Thanks, Julie. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep. It's all
All
working.
right. Perfect. All right. Perfect. So just a couple of pretty pictures, maybe not so pretty pictures. I'm just going to give you a little overview on HABs this year and also a little bit of historical perspective. This is the same slide that I showed you last year with another bar added. We are 1 year lagged on our data for how we track HABs. The bar chart shows the cumulative number of water bodies that are plagued with these harmful algal blooms. And to the right, you'll see the distribution. So they're basically everywhere. What I like to say when I show this slide is that, remember, this is both a combination of more HABs, but also a greater awareness. A good part of what our HABs team does is educate the public about what a harmful algal bloom is, how to know what it is, how to report it, and to stay away from it. So it's really a public health campaign that we take very seriously because people can get very sick. Last year, we rolled out our NIHAP system, which, if you haven't gotten a chance to take a look at it, is a pretty cool little widget that, again, we're educating the public on how to, right from your smartphone, when you're out on a water body, you're out kayaking or fishing or whatnot. If you see a HAB, take a picture of it. You can send it in through our little widget, and then our team of scientists can very quickly say, yes, in fact, that is a confirmed harmful algal bloom. Put it up on this interactive map, and in almost near real time, we like to say, let everyone else around know that there's a harmful algal bloom in this location, and to choose to kayak or fish somewhere further downstream or on a different part of a lake. Because of how HABs come and go very quickly and they move around, we really think that this type of reporting, this near real time, can't quite get to real time, but near real time, is important so that people can continue to recreate and do it with as much information as possible. You've seen this before. In 2018, the governor announced a huge Hab initiative, and I'm going to show you where we've spent that money. We did have 12 priority water bodies, these harmful algal bloom action plans, regional summits. We've done some very intricate, what we call advanced monitoring, fancy buoys that are in a number of lakes telling us more about what's causing HABs, and what we call our mitigation pilot projects, which I'll talk more about. Key to this initiative has been trying to figure out what causes HABs so that we can tackle things at the source. But also a big part is how to help people in the immediate term. Folks don't want to hear that's going to take me 10 years to fix their lake. They want to know what we can do right now. So it's sort of a twofold effort on that front, and I'll tell you more. So what are our mitigation strategies? And I really like to focus or remind folks that it's twofold. And I know everyone on the phone can appreciate this. I always start with watershed management and the battle against nutrients. When we talk about HABs, again, people don't have a lot of patience when I tell them that nutrient reduction is going to result in improvements to their water body in the long term. They want the short-term solutions, but we do not go into public meetings or these different events without talking about nutrient controls in the watershed, and whether that's wastewater treatment plants or our new buffer program, stream bank things, stormwater, et cetera. You know the list, but it's really important in our messaging that we continue to talk about reducing nutrients in our water bodies, because no matter what nuanced aspect of HAB science you want to talk about, if you want to talk about, if you slightly change the bit of salt, or if you can adjust a wind flow, maybe that contributes to a HAB. There's lots of hypotheses out there, but we know with certainty that nutrients cause HABs. So we talk about nutrient reductions as no regrets actions. Everything that local communities that are concerned about HABs that they can do to reduce nutrients is key. So I always like to start with that. And then we do, as I said, feel a lot of pressure from communities, from the public, to come up with those in-lake management strategies to have more of an immediate impact on HABs. And that comes in the form of sort of these emergency response or interim solutions, et cetera. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Oh, somebody did fancy underlining. There we go. So in 2019, but also again in 2020, we had an opportunity to continue some work on what we call the mitigation pilots. We're looking at a number of different actions that can control a HAB or even prevent a HAB or possibly lessen a HAB in water bodies that we know are plagued with these things. We've looked at nutrient inactivants. Those are things like alum that you can put in a water body where there's a lot of phosphorus coming out of the sediment in the bottom, a lot of legacy nutrients, where we could possibly lock those into the bottom so that the water column itself can be cleaner. We're looking at things, the use of hydrogen peroxide, which is similar but different to copper sulfate. It's actually has fewer legacy impacts from things like that are commonly used like copper. But it's much more expensive. So what role does that have, and can that really knock down a HAB after it forms? We're using ultrasonic devices, which are, there's any number of them that have been used that put out certain sound waves that keep the harmful algal blooms from floating to the top and getting the sunlight that they need to replicate and continue to bloom. We're partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers using what they call it's essentially like mini wastewater treatment plants that can grab the biomass that is the harmful algal bloom and remove it, physically remove it from the water body. We're also, the last two I'll talk a little bit more about, using techniques called electrochemical oxidation and hydrodynamic cavitation, which we're really excited about. So let me tell you a little bit more. Just some pictures here to show you what some of these devices look like. Nutrient inactivants, again, it's a chemical treatment. The ultrasonic is not. Hydrogen peroxide it is a chemical treatment as well. You see that picture there. So in late 2019, I think roughly about the time this roundtable happened last year, we were down in Suffolk County on Lake Agawam on the town of Southampton, trying out this algae harvester, which you'll see a picture of here on the bottom left of your screen. What we were trying to do again was to remove that biomass that is the harmful algal bloom from the water body. We were looking at what that does as far as removing the HAB cells, but also, how clean is that technology? Can we do that? How much diesel fuel are we burning in the generators when we do that? How many toxins are we using? What kind of chemicals do we have to treat? So we learned a lot from that. There were some successes and some questions coming out of that pilot. We took that same technology in 2020 in partnership with Army Corps and others, and we were able to pilot it in Chautauqua Lake, which is known for the very intense harmful algal blooms that happened there. They were able to take what was an onshore deployment of that technology in Lake Agawam and deploy it on a boat in Chautauqua Lake. So we are still waiting for final results from this project because it did just conclude at the end of August. But we're optimistic that we're increasing the energy efficiency, that we're able to, when the biomass, that harmful algal bloom biomass is removed, they're actually piloting with the university, turning it into sneaker foam or something like that. So it's cool. It's a little greener than maybe what we had before, but more to come on that technology. That particular technology works best in more eutrophic, or those types of systems where there are thicker, greener, uglier mats of both harmful algal bloom and other algae biomass. This technology was developed in Florida on Lake Okeechobee. So for those of you that are familiar with Lake Okeechobee, thankfully we don't have a lot of Lake Okeechobees in New York, but we do have some places where it may be the right solution or short-term solution. We were excited in early March of 2019, I guess, Governor Cuomo designated SUNY ESF and Clarkson University as the New York State Center of Excellence in Healthy Water Solutions. And what this did was it set up a neat partnership that we were able to take advantage of between the two universities to address harmful algal blooms. And the governor himself challenged the two universities to come up with mitigation technologies tackle HABs. I think there's a bottle of scotch perhaps still being debated in that challenge. And both universities had some really interesting ideas, new technologies that they think can be deployed in a way that can help some of the types of HABs we see in New York. So what you'll see here in the pictures are actually what those technologies have gone from labs at universities to in 2020, we're actually able to take them to Lake Neotawanta in upstate New York and try them out on a HAB. Lake Neotawanta is a very, what we call HABsy lake, but we were able to take those researchers, we set up all sorts of experiments and we deployed these new technologies, the hydrodynamic cavitation and the electrochemical oxidation. And we're seeing that we're able to knock back a HAB. We have a lot of work to do, but we're learning a lot as far as how to deploy these things so that when a HAB is closing a beach or threatening a drinking water intake or causing problems in a marina, that maybe we could deploy one of these devices, or they'll be commercially available hopefully someday, that a lake association or a community could buy one themselves to deploy to protect, you know, in those more surgical deployments. So a lot more work to come there, but we're excited about that. Just a slide, a nerdy science slide. What are we working on for those of you that are, you know, like to think about things like zooplankton and phytoplankton interactions, or what does an ultrasonic device do to the fish? Just a slide to let you know, we're asking all of those questions. We know that folks are impatient for those long-term nutrient reduction strategies, as I said, but we also know that it's the agency's responsibility to do our due diligence to be sure that we don't offer communities or offer support for some of these technologies. There's a lot of them out there. These are the ones we're working on, but that we are careful about what we're saying to communities. Yes, we understand that HABs are dangerous, but that doesn't mean that you can pick a device to deploy that's going to wreak havoc on the fish or destroy the zooplankton, et cetera. So a lot of work is going into this. It takes a long time. People are impatient with us, but again, a lot of due diligence there. Funding. Jim referenced these numbers. I put them up on a slide so you can all see them. This is 2018. So we have a series of queries that we run because people are constantly asking us, how much money are we spending on the HABs initiative? The governor's promised a dollar amount. We've delivered way more. And what you'll see here is the breakdown. So for 2018, I also have 2019 in the next slide, over $78 million. And that's 45 million plus through WQIP and the engineering planning grant. And there's 70 projects there. And then I give the breakdown for the HABs lakes, if you're interested. I also were able to track in a broader way what Ag and Markets has awarded in projects, just under 14 million. For 44 projects, which again, we know farms are part of that nutrient discussion. EFC has also awarded 19 million for 25 projects through their program. So I wanted to put these numbers out there. Folks ask, we get a lot of media questions about them. The questions are always a little different, so the numbers change, but this is how I like to present it. And then I'll show you the same thing for 2019. In 2019, again, the number went up. It was over $100 million. Again, I am giving you the breakdowns for WQIP, EPG, NPG, the non-point source planning grant that Jim referenced that we were really excited to bring out in 2019. Again, Ag and Markets and EFC numbers are here as well. So those are the dollars. As Jim said, you know, beyond HABs, it's also one of my hats is WQIP, EPG. We 100% are moving money out the door. Projects are happening on the ground despite COVID. So although WQIP and EPG have not come out yet in 2020, and I'm going to say yet, there's still some time, we are making good progress. The communities are doing work. Things are happening on the ground. There was a little bit of a lag. There was a time period there when things got a little complicated, and but everything is moving and has been for some time. So we're very excited about that. We're reviewing engineering reports. We're moving permits forward, establishing contracts, et cetera. So although we hope to see additional rounds of funding go forward, and we're ready to do that, please don't feel like work has stopped, because it has not. That's what I had. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions coming in for you, Jackie. Okay, hold on. The first is a request to please, can you send me your PowerPoint so I can send it out to the participants? They would really love to see it.
Absolutely. Brian has the PowerPoint, so I'm going to.
Okay, so that's done already.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Damn, you are good. Okay, hold on. What would a community that isn't among the first 12 develop? How would a community that isn't among the first 12 develop its own Hobbs plan? And then Dan gives for instances. Is there a Hobbs framework similar to the DWSP2 framework? Is there a grant program funded for the needed planning?
Okay, so generally what we do have a few other communities beyond the initial HABs 12 that have developed action plans. The Lake Agawam community is one, but you know, Jim referenced that we have these 9 element plans, and you know, what's the same, what's different? You know, the 90 plans are a great place to start because the framework is well established. Communities are familiar with it, and there's funding for communities to organize and start developing that. So although there are a few HABs action plans coming out for a variety of reasons, that's where we send communities to start. Again, because it gives them that funding to start that 90 plan. It does involve the agency, DEC does approve those. They have the same technical bar as a TMDL, which is nice because it requires that level of modeling, et cetera. And the 90 plan and the HABs action plan both have that locally driven, what do we as a community want to work collaboratively on to address nutrients in our watershed? And that's really key, because if I were to write a HABs action plan from my kitchen right now, but if I was to write a HABs action plan for a community without saying to them, you know, hey, do you guys want to work on septics? Do you want to work on wastewater treatment plant improvements? Do you want to work on stormwater? If I make those decisions myself, it really means nothing. So the framework set up in that 90 plan is key for that.
Okay, thank you. Also recently, I'm sure you know, there were HABs for the first time detected in Mirror Lake and Lake George, which was pretty sad, but this has raised questions of not only nutrient loads to cause the HABs, but also the impact of excess road salt and lake chemistry. And are you looking, is the DEC looking into that?
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit, just for a minute, about what we know right now, what's happening in Lake George. Lake George and Mirror Lake both are fully mixed right now. So for those of you that don't know, in the summertime, our lakes set up, they create layers, and in the fall, those layers mix. So the very nutrient-rich water from the bottom of a lake comes firing to the top of the lake in the fall. That combined with some very warm, calm weather that we had late in October, early November, seems to have created an opportunity for some blooms to happen where you wouldn't normally see them. We are watching what's happening in Lake George very carefully. We were, the partners there are great. We've been on site, continuing to watch. I will correct, Adrian, if I can, or modify a little bit of what you said. This is the first time DEC has confirmed a harmful algal bloom. It is certainly not the first time that cyanobacteria has been there. We know that cyanobacteria has been in every water body since dinosaurs walked this planet. So we're not sure if something is changing in Lake George, or if we just had some circumstances here in the fall that we don't normally see. So it's going to take some effort to sort through that. But again, in the meetings that we've had so far with stakeholders, and there's more to come in Lake George in the next couple of weeks, no regrets actions, keep working on nutrients. Folks there, if anything, use this bloom to garner that local support to do more on nutrients. And they've done a lot on nutrients. They're doing a lot on nutrients. They're looking at septic systems. The other thing I'll say with Lake George that is concerning right now is the number of homeowners who are drinking untreated lake water. So our messaging is also, we're spending a lot of time trying to help folks understand why that's not safe, whether there's a Hab or not a Hab, you still shouldn't drink untreated lake water. So more to come there, but it's a little hard to reconstruct history to know exactly what was happening. Hopefully they'll go away and they'll stay away, but we're gonna use this as momentum to help that community get focused on nutrient reductions.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have to move on. We appreciate all your work and your effort. Thank you again for participating every year, Jackie. We
just one
appreciate
quick
that.
follow-up, Adrian. Jackie,
Oh,
are
wait,
you
I'm
talking
sorry,
to Paul
Jackie.
Smiths about the road salt?
David, can you
What?
repeat the question? Because I was talking at the same time.
Okay, I was just going to say, have you talked to Paul Smiths about the interaction with the road salt and the concern with the lake chemistry in Mirror Lake? Because that's just a concern.
Yep, I've heard the hypothesis, and it's certainly a hypothesis that has been studied elsewhere. I don't know that the scientific community has come to a conclusion about the role of road salt in HABs. So there's more research that's needed to be done there. I couldn't say whether I think that's particularly the issue in Mirror Lake. It's a hypothesis and we should test it. But again, if you were going to pick one thing to do with Mirror Lake, make sure that we're being really careful about the nutrient inputs there. And road salt can have a nutrient input, but the role of salt itself is a little more complicated. So more to come there. We're going to certainly talk to folks and look at research, but also look at the research on road salt and Hab interactions in other places and see what folks are finding.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we really need to move on now. Thank you again, Jackie. Okay, moving swiftly along, I think an issue that's near and dear to all of us as well is drinking water for affordability. And we started, I think, our discussions and our collaboration on this issue actually last year. We had no idea how important it would be magnified this year, given some economic struggles that many, many people throughout the state are having. So we're going to hear now from both Larry Levine from NRDC and Rob Hayes from EA. So Larry and Rob.
Great. Thanks so much, Adrian. And good morning, everyone. It is great to see you all. This is Rob from EA-NY. So this past March, Environmental Advocates NY and about a dozen partner organizations, many from Western New York, formed a new water justice coalition. We came together in response to the COVID-19 pandemic with the goal to ensure that all New Yorkers have affordable water in their homes. Facing a massive economic crisis, many families can't afford their water bills right now, as Adrian just mentioned, a problem that is likely to worsen as the virus resurges and federal stimulus remains stalled. These missed payments can trap families in crushing water bill debt and can cause utilities to shut off water or place a lien on the home that can lead to foreclosure. And it's important to note that water bills were already unaffordable for many New Yorkers before COVID-19, and that the pandemic has exacerbated underlying inequalities. And the problem is especially visible and pronounced in the city of Buffalo. From 2015 through March 2019, Buffalo terminated water on over 17,000 occasions. And the data also reveals how the water affordability crisis hits low-income communities and communities of color the hardest. In the 4 Buffalo zip codes with the highest rates of water shutoffs, the childhood poverty rate is at least 43%, and at least 50% of the population is non-white. And these same zip codes have also now had the city's highest rates of COVID-19 infection. So our coalition began to advocate for solutions to keep the water on and keep New Yorkers financially afloat during the pandemic and beyond. And after several months of advocacy, the state legislature passed a landmark bill in June, which included many of our priorities and which the governor signed shortly thereafter. And I'll quickly highlight the main components of that bill before turning over to Larry to kind of dive into the details of implementation and future issues to address. And before I do that, I'll just note that all the provisions I mentioned are currently set to expire on March 31st of this coming year. So first, the law establishes a moratorium on all utility shutoffs in New York. So that's electric, gas, telephone, water. and that law encompasses both public and private water utilities. And that moratorium lasts for the duration of the COVID-19 state of emergency, which is currently ongoing, and so the moratorium is ongoing. So that's the first main component of the law. The second main component is that for New Yorkers who are suffering financial harm right now due to the COVID-19 crisis, the bill also bans utility shutoffs for 180 days after the end of the governor's currently declared state of emergency. For those New Yorkers, late fees and penalties on those late bills are also prohibited, and they're guaranteed access to extended or deferred repayment plans to help them get back on their feet financially. So that's the second main point. And the third main point is that utilities were required to restore service to anyone that might have been disconnected during the COVID-19 state of emergency, which began February or March, somewhere in there. So for anyone that might have had their water turned off during that time, utilities were required to turn that back on. So that's kind of an overview of where we were, the new law that the legislature passed, and I'll turn it to Larry now to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Rob. And so I want to tease out a little bit further a few of the key aspects of the law, and then transition, as Rob said, to what some of the further future needs are to address this issue, but during COVID and beyond. Rob mentioned that the extended protections that go beyond the end of the state of emergency, those apply to customers who suffered or experienced financial impact due to the state of emergency. Not just because they or a family member perhaps got COVID, but also the overall state of the economy. And they get the additional 180-day shutoff protection, prohibition on late fees, and the right to a deferred payment plan. The law directed the Department of Public Service to define what it means to be financially impacted by COVID, by the state of emergency, to qualify for those protections. The Department of Public Service says that, and they issued a guidance defining this, anyone who self-certifies that they've experienced that financial impact qualifies. So if a customer signs a form and submits it to the utility that says, I experienced the financial impact, they don't have to document specific loss of income. There's not a kind of some involved process on the utility side that they need to assess against certain criteria. Does this person qualify or not? It's based on self-certification. A second important point to tease out around extended payment plans, right? And the term of art that's used in the law is a deferred payment agreement. And what that means is if you've got, say, you've accumulated, say, $500 in arrears, when a moratorium lifts, you don't have to pay all that immediately. You have the right as a customer to negotiate an extended period to pay that off with the utility. So say it's $500, and I'm just going to make up a number. There's no specific timeline for it that's in the law. But say if you paid that off over a year, you take 500 divided by 12, and each month you pay that much on top of staying current with your new monthly bills. Right? The law doesn't set a specific minimum length of time, but it does, and this is very important, cross-reference, incorporate by reference, existing regulations of the Public Service Commission that apply to commission-regulated water, electric, and gas utilities, and it applies them now to all utilities, including publicly owned water systems. Regulations specifically about deferred payment agreements. And those regulations require that the payment agreements have to be affordable based on the individual customer's financial circumstances. So a utility can't just have a one-size-fits-all offer to all customers. It will give you 12 months to pay it back. They have to actually take into consideration the specific financial circumstances and ability to pay of each customer. And the regulations specifically state that the monthly payment could be as little as $10 per month when needed. And this is sort of a new universe for publicly owned water systems who have previously not been subject to those regulations, to the regulations of the Public Service Commission really at all on any issue. And so there's a learning curve that we've observed here And quite frankly, a lot of publicly owned municipal utilities or authorities that have stated policies about deferred payment agreements that haven't been consistent with those requirements. And so there's a really important process of education of the utilities that needs to happen here as the moratorium remains in place, so that we can use that time from now through March to educate customers and get them in the door and into those sorts of payment plans and into other assistance programs that exist to help them relieve some of that debt. The law specifically requires the utilities to educate, to notify customers of their rights under the law. And that's one place where we see this issue coming up of what are the offers of payment plans that are being made. The notices that are going out to customers oftentimes don't describe really what the rights are of the customer accurately to get an affordable payment plan. Right? There is guidance from the Department of Public Service around this, both sort of legal guidance directed to the utilities and more of an FAQ sort of public-facing document that describes what customers' rights are and what utilities' obligations are. I'll add a link to that in the chat after I end here. One last note about the bill on reconnections, and hopefully there's nobody who's still disconnected, right, after all these months, but from non-payment earlier on. But if there is, the bill also speaks to safe reconnections, meaning when you turn the water back on after water's been stagnant in premise plumbing, that can lead to contamination issues, both in terms of the growth of pathogens in the pipes in the stagnant water, and in terms of lead contamination from leaching from the premise plumbing that can happen when the water is stagnant and there's not the flow of water with the chemical treatment to coat the lining of the pipes, and it takes time for that coating essentially to kind of be reestablished once the water's been turned on. So there's a need for flushing the premise plumbing systems and for filters in some cases when there's a lead concern. And so there's a real need for utilities to be aware of that when they're turning water back on for anyone who had been previously shut off. So I'll just transition from there to just looking forward. We've got this moratorium in place. We've got people unable to pay. We've got many of those people who frankly are going to be unable to pay even on an extended payment plan, or at least not without a very extended payment plan, right? And even for some people paying, at least for some period of time, paying $10 on top of their existing bills when they have trouble paying the existing bill is going to be challenging, right? The extended payment plan is about paying more than you usually would pay. And so there's a need really, and this is a need from the customer side and from the utility side, to be looking at funding to help these customers pay down these arrears, which in turn provides revenue for the utilities to help fill a budget gap that they're experiencing from decreased collections, decreased payments by the residential customers, right? And so one thing that's critical that's missing is there's not data on the extent of the need, right? There's, especially for the publicly owned utilities, there's not any entity that exists that is collecting or would be the obvious one to impose a requirement to collect that data. On the regulated utility side, Public Service Commission has authority to direct that, and they have an open proceeding that may result in those sort of data submission requirements. But there's a real need for that, and I would argue a shared interest across everyone, the utilities, customers, and everyone else, for that data to be gathered, to be made public, to be able to inform policymakers about what's the scale of the need, so that we can work on finding money, which is not going to be easy, but work on finding money to meet that need. And then lastly, these are, as I think Adrian alluded to, and Rob, water affordability issues predate COVID. They've been spotlighted and exacerbated by COVID, and we need long-term solutions that are going to outlast COVID as well. And so from the coalition, part of our hope is that the attention that's been brought to this issue and the crisis that it's engendered it will help to elevate the importance of the water affordability issue on the agenda in Albany, and that we can all, as a water community, work to coalesce around long-term solutions for that. Water infrastructure funding, of course, is going to help with that, right? But by itself is not sufficient. It is a really important part of it, but we need to also be looking at additional solutions to that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Larry, very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for your great work on that. I don't see any questions in the chat, probably because you've been so efficient and clear. Okay. Thank you again. Appreciate it. Next issue, water infrastructure needs and challenges. Now we're going to hear from the wastewater treatment operators and also from the water suppliers. And I think, you know, as environmental advocates, as many of you are, you know, it's one thing for us to advocate for the policy, to, you know, write a policy. And many times it's another thing to be the ones on the ground implementing that policy. And that's why I think it was really important for this roundtable, you know, to be in a partnership with, you know, NIWEA and also AWWA and also the New York State Rural Water Association, which are the coalitions for the water supply, drinking water suppliers, and also wastewater treatment operators. So their voice and their experience and their role in our society cannot be overstated. So we're really happy to have today Matt Millay, who's representing NIWEA, and also Judith Hansen from AWWA. So Matt and Judith, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see everybody. Really important dialogue today, and really want to thank everyone in the coalition for keeping the pressure on and for all that you've done to get us to where we are today. I agree completely with Jim Tierney that what New York State has done is remarkable, and we are leading the nation. So our legislators that are on the call, thank you to the governor and the governor's staff. They have done a tremendous job coming from 2015, where there was some initial appropriations to where we are today, is remarkable, even in light of the fiscal crisis that we all know the state now faces. It's encouraging to hear that grants are moving again. I think we were all watching with great interest when we know the brakes were put on, and I think that was certainly understandable, not knowing where the crisis was headed, but it's certainly a relief to hear that grant funding is flowing again and commitments that have been made are being followed through on. But as always, we do know that the need absolutely exceeds the supply of resources. Just to give you the two numbers is the IUP for the Environmental Facilities Corporation intended use plan. The current draft is $3.8 billion in immediate need listed and $10 billion in multi-year need just on those lists. And we know that there's much more need outside of those lists for people that don't necessarily submit their reports. But at the same time, again, credit where credit is due. When you hear Jim Tierney and his enthusiasm, and we've known Jim a long time, I think he's one of the longest serving members of the DEC staff now. I think he's heading into his 13th or 14th year. And to hear him run through the variety of programs that they've implemented, the energy with which they're being put into place, we can be grateful that the state is doing as much as they are doing. But we then look to Washington and we say, what can we do and what can we expect? It's been a frustrating summer for all of us. We work very closely with our partners in the environmental community, as well as the Water Environment Federation and AWWA on a national level. And it's a struggle to get a grip for all of us on what's going on in Washington. But the good news is that everybody is still talking about infrastructure as a key component of getting out of the fiscal stress caused by COVID. We've certainly heard it from the president-elect. We've heard it from the House, absolutely. Their $3 trillion HEROES Act contained a tremendous investment in infrastructure, including water infrastructure. And we will likely see the Senate come along because everybody recognizes the need. So that is positive. And again, for all of you that have been putting the pressure on, we'll work with you to keep the pressure on. It's remarkable to see, again, at the wastewater operator level, the work that they've done on the testing for COVID. I think Jim highlighted that a little bit, but credit to Arcadis and to the municipal partners that worked on that. It's a tremendous story on working at the community level to see when COVID is spiking. And I think we'll continue to hear about that effort and how it is helping communities contain community spread and really tackle these hot zones that the governor identifies in his briefings. I'd like to thank EFC for, if you're not aware, EFC made an important change to their hardship determination policy a few months ago, I think it was, maybe 2 months ago, where now environmental justice communities are automatically given hardship funding, which is an important change, taking some of the complexity out of the traditional hardship calculation. That should help cities that are looking for 0% financing when they're doing utility work in environmental justice communities. I think it's very much in line with CLCPA and other efforts from the administration. And on a specific policy level, our utility managers, and we do have a utility manager on with us today who I'm going to invite to give us a couple of words, Joe Fiegel from Erie County, if that's all right. I'd like to give him a moment to just chime in, but the issue of digesters and digester gas and how that fits into CLCPA. We heard earlier about investments that have been made by NYSERDA and other programs for it, and we are looking for a seat at the table to be part of that discussion, ensure that the investments that the state and local governments have made into digesters continue through into the framework of the CLCPA. So those are some of the key elements. And finally, what I would like to also add is, as we thank our frontline workers who are just doing incredible work on a healthcare level, police, fire, that we also make sure we remember our water and wastewater operators and recall that they're really doing the 24/7 job under some pretty severe conditions, like many of our frontline workers. And while I think they have gotten some recognition, we can always give them more and recognize them as being as critical to the health and safety of our communities as our police, fire, and healthcare workers. So to our utility workers, when you see them, thank them. And certainly we appreciate that's a 24/7 job that has not gone away. And like our power, water, wastewater operators, some of them have had to sequester, sleep in trailers to keep the facilities going, and they've done a remarkable job. So with that, Joe, given that you're in the business and you've been struggling with that since the beginning, if you wouldn't mind chiming in for just a moment, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Wasn't planning on talking when joined on, but I'm very happy to do so. For those that don't know me, I'm Joe Fiegel. In my day-to-day role, I'm the head of Erie County Sewer Districts. I'm also vice chair of NYWEA's Utility Executives Committee and a past president of the association. As a past president, I can tell you that the partnerships that we've fostered over the last few years with all the folks on the line here have been incredibly valuable. I don't think that the funding that is now coming to our municipalities, I don't think it would be coming without the shared voice that we've had on these various issues. So I do want to give a heartfelt thanks to the advocacy groups on the line, those that are in government on the legislative level and the government level as well. Really do thank you. So with regard to what Matt had mentioned, as a utility operator, we've faced some tremendous challenges during this pandemic. We're folks in the sewer industry, so we're used to working with bacteria and viruses due to the wastewater that we manage. We have employees to go through annual training on proper measures to protect themselves from potential hazards while operating equipment at our wastewater treatment plants, maintaining sewer infrastructure, and more. But this pandemic has had us thinking about viruses and bacteria in a much different way. We've commented that the doorknobs at our facilities may be more of an employee concern than the sewage flowing into the facilities, just because of the nature of this pandemic. And our biggest concerns, and this has been since March and continues today, is that the illness is going to spread through our staff. We require 24/7 coverage, as Matt mentioned, at many of our sites. And these are not jobs that can be done remotely. We need people, boots on the ground, and keeping those facilities going. We've gone to great lengths to protect our employees. Matt had mentioned some of them. I mean, there's even some utilities that are running trailers to be able to sequester folks for several days. You know, that means that they're away from their families, you know, for those periods of time. Changing shifts, you know, enhanced facility cleaning, enacting further distancing protocols, all those type of things to try to keep everything going. But this is a constant fight. Just in the last week's time, just for Erie County sewer districts, in just the last actually 6 days, I've had 5 employees go into quarantine at the sewer district sites. Thus far, none of them have been traced to spread at work. You know, I think part of a lot of the protocols that we put into place, but that just shows the challenges and the factors that are really out of our control. You know, these are folks that don't only just work at these plants, they also, you know, have lives outside, and they're subject to everything else that you all in the community are facing. So you know, that really kind of brings home some of the challenges that we have. We're looking at the future challenges. You know, not only is this a health crisis, but this is also an economic crisis. And you know, so on the last 2 speakers from Environmental Advocacy and Larry had mentioned, you know, some of the concerns about affordability. You know, we similarly have concerns about the revenues that may not be coming, you know, because of the pandemic, from businesses closing down, and things like that. So I think we need to continue to keep this conversation. As Matt mentioned, please thank your local wastewater treatment plant operators and the folks on the ground. And once again, really appreciate everyone's efforts here.
Thank you, Joe. And just to close out, before I turn it over to Judy, who's being very patient. Sorry, Adrian. But to follow on the last, I was really happy to follow the discussion on rate setting. We talked about that a little bit last year, also when we were at the LOB together. I think that is an absolutely critical issue going forward for us as we continue to advocate for the funding to come in. We have to keep in mind, and Jim mentioned this in the context of the asset management program, what happens if there's a federal stimulus injection of cash, and really working together on finding a balance and rate setting where we do help those disadvantaged communities, but we also ensure that people like Joe can manage their bond payments and their staffs. And it's a critical issue for the future, because we have shifted so much of the cost onto the utilities themselves that we have to have a deeper dive discussion on it. And I was really pleased with both Robert and Larry's presentation on that. So we look forward to further engagement on it. And thank you for having us.
All right, Judith.
Okay, I've got a couple of slides here. I'm going to share my screen. So just give me a minute. Okay. Okay. I was tasked by Adrian to present the challenges facing the drinking water community in 10 minutes. I'm going to try to do that, but hopefully I'm successful. Here's our infrastructure. We have infrastructure challenges. There's 4 things that we've agreed on. There are infrastructure, specifically the challenges by the new MCLs on 1,4 and the PFAS compounds. As alluded to before, the EPA's pending revision of the lead and copper rule, and the COVID-19 pandemic issues. And I think Matt and Joe just summed up that pretty nicely for us. So in infrastructure, real briefly, that $40 billion, excuse me, dollars in infrastructure costs that we've all seen this number, we've all talked about this number. We've argued, is it good? Is it bad? Is it too high? Is it too low? What I think we can all agree on is a very big number. But today, what I want to take away from this slide is what doesn't it include? What's not in that $40 billion? And it doesn't include the costs for compliance for the new MCLs for 1,4 and the perfluorinateds. It doesn't include any funding for source water protection. It doesn't include the soft costs that are normally associated with capital improvement projects. One of the biggest ones that's not included in that number is the cost of engineering. Engineering on a complex, larger project typically can run 20% of construction costs. For our folks on Long Island, there's land acquisition costs. If you have a wellhead, a pump station there, to put in an AOP system, or, you know, even a carbon system, you need more land generally. Piloting studies, design studies. So there's a lot of elements that aren't in that 40 billion. And finally, something that we've all talked about, whether it's water or wastewater, are all of the costs associated with climate change and utility resiliency. So we have infrastructure challenges, but typically that 40 billion number that we talk about is really repair and replacement, and it doesn't include any of these other things that we're also very focused on. So in general, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail because I think Roger and Gary, you know, have dealt with this, but for the last 46 years, drinking water suppliers have been dealing with maximum contaminant levels that have been set by our regulators. And they continue to be set by our regulators, and they continue to be set based on sound science, best available treatment technology, and a robust risk-benefit analysis. Like all of you in the drinking water and the wastewater community, we provide advocacy and input during that process. But once the MCL is handed down, as it was on August 26th, all our conversation stops, and we're just all about compliance, and that's our job. So very specifically on these new MCLs, it's the cost, and whether New York State AWWA and the Long Island Water Council and New York DOH may differ on the number, but I think we all can agree that the cost of compliance of construction is about $1.5 billion across the state, and the operating costs are going to be significant. So who pays the bills? And I think Matt just summed this up pretty well. We're very, very grateful for all of the money that's been given in terms of grants or low interest loans through the governor and the legislature. We thank them very much through the WIA program and the DWSRF. And I also want to give a shout out to EFC. I think if I talk to my colleagues around the country in other states, our EFC is most efficient bar none. They turn that money around and they leverage those dollars. And everybody in my long career that I've ever talked to at the EFC, and we've been funding many of our projects with them since 1998. They are very enthusiastic and extremely helpful and understand their job is to get that money out the door, and they're very good at it. But we also understand, given the state's fiscal crisis, that there's a lot of worthy, I don't want to say causes, but there are a lot of worthy places to put very few dollars. So with that realization, we understand that the costs of all of these, whether it's, you know, regular infrastructure improvement or the cost of compliance with these new MCLs, the burden is on the local ratepayers, and the rates are going to go up as a result of this. And we're very sensitive to the issues that Robert and Larry raised. And I don't know if we have any answers, but as Joe said, we still have to keep the lights on and keep paying the bills. So there's got to be a solution, and we're willing to participate in that discussion, and we welcome that discussion. We just don't know what the answer is yet. One of the other big challenges on these new MCL compliance is time. You know, treatment for these MCLs has to be geared and to the source water. It's not cookie cutter. It's not one size fits all. You don't sit down and order up an AOP facility from Amazon and have it on your front porch. I mean, it would be nice if you could. The design is very system specific. You need qualified consultants, competent contractors, the regulatory review piece. I don't know if everybody on this call understands that anything that a water or a water facility in particular, from treatment through distribution, any improvement or change that you make has to be signed off on by the New York State Department of Health, and in particular, their design review section. They have a pretty big caseload or workload under normal circumstances. This, you can imagine, as these projects come in, designs come into them. And as far as I know, and I hope Roger and Gary may be able to inform me a little bit, But as far as I understand, it's the same 4 or 5 people that have been there, and they haven't seen any significant increase in experienced staffing to help move this process along. So people need to be, I know it's hard to tell a community that has an MCL violation to be patient, but there's no way we can build these things overnight. I know that I just want to say a couple things about compliance deferral. I know almost everybody on this call, but the water suppliers that are here and the people from New York AWWA were very much against having this included, this deferral process included in the new regs, in the new MCLs. And so we're sensitive to that. But I think you need to understand, and I know that we don't even know how many people have applied for deferrals yet, because the application process is still open. But our sense in the drinking water community is that it's only going to be a few systems. And I liken the process, as I've understood it, as DOH has explained it to us, much like an order on consent. There's going to be milestones. You're going to have to meet those milestones. And if you don't, that deferral will be yanked. It provides an opportunity while the construction for all those systems that are already on that trajectory toward compliance. They've already started the process. If you haven't already started that process, you are not going to qualify for a deferral. So if you're a community like mine, where we've just done our second quarterly set of monitoring samples, we're not eligible for a deferral, even if we find an exceedance. It's only for those few utilities that are a little ahead of the curve here. It's going to mean that they're going to have to do some outreach to their customers above and beyond what is normally required. And I think most importantly, it'll give them a time to follow a normal bidding and procurement process rather than an emergency process, because that always costs more in the long run. Just switching gears very briefly, you heard mention of the new lead and copper rules that are coming out. We don't know where this rule is. It's been stuck in EPA. I think Adrian had we're going to be happy after January to see the EPA return. But we've seen the draft of legislation. It's been through public comment. EPA, as our understanding, has dealt with those public comments, revised the rule accordingly, and it's now stuck in OMB. We expect it to be out in early 2021, if not sooner. One of the things, and this is a misstatement, it's not a lower action level. The action, first of all, let me just back up. An action level is not a measure of public health risk, not in terms of water suppliers' obligations under the lead and copper rule, either new or revised. It's rather an indication of the efficacy and the efficiency of the water system's corrosion control for lead and copper, but mostly for lead. We are obligated to go to the worst case scenarios, those homes, or usually homes, they want you to go to a tier 1 system that have known lead services. And you're supposed to collect the sample after it's been sitting in the water for 6, 7, 8 hours. So it's the worst case scenario. And you want to see if that, what your action level is, what your 90 percentile is in all the samples that you collect, to see if you need to make changes to your treatment system. We're pretty sure, although we haven't seen the final version yet, that the new and revised lead and copper rule coming out of EPA will have a trigger level at 0.1. So you're not at you might be under your 0.15 action level, but if you're at 0.1, you have to start looking at your corrosion control and optimizing it again. It's going to change some of the sampling protocols and responsibilities. And it's going to make utilities now responsible, even if you don't own the lead, any part of the service lateral, which in our community, we don't. You're going to have to maintain an inventory of lateral compositions for your service laterals. And it's going to mandate, if anything, you can't do partial lead service lateral replacements anymore, which is a good thing, because we know from peer-reviewed studies that increases the lead in the drinking water for at least 2 or 3 months after that partial lead service replacement occurs. So there's going to be a lot of changes associated with this lead and copper rule. We all are in agreement. There is no safe level of lead anywhere. So this is a good thing, but there's going to be a cost associated with it, and it's going to have to be borne mostly by our ratepayers. So that lends more credence to let's talk about water affordability. Finally, the challenges, pandemic, and I think Joe summed this up. We are essential workers. You know, a couple of my people can work from home and manage things, but mostly our folks have to be in each and every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's really hard to fix a water main break or a sewer collapse from your couch on your laptop. It's just not the kind of work that we do. Much like the doctors and the nurses and the grocery clerks, we have to go to work. So this pandemic has challenged all of us. We all had emergency plans. We all had pandemic plans. We had to dust them off. We had to look at them. And we had to make a lot of overtime. I had one utility colleague of mine. He had one gentleman, a foreman, come in to work in the spring. He thought he was battling his seasonal allergies because he was a foreman. It turned not because he was a foreman, but it wasn't his seasonal allergies. It was COVID. He took out for 14 days of quarantine, 14 of his employees. It's really hard to run a utility when you're down 14. We've had to suspend non-essential services during the height of the pandemic, and I think we're probably going to cycle back there again, unfortunately, over the winter. You know, we don't go into people's basements unless it's an emergency. I'm not sending our employees into the house if I don't have to. And we've had we personally made significant investments in our ventilation systems to install HEPA filters and to install UV systems in our. But the impact on water sales is going to vary. And if you talk to people, my water sales actually went up because we don't have a lot of industry. We're a residential-based community by and large, or small offices. And so people were home, kids were home, toilets flushed, water went through the meter. Many of my colleagues' water sales went down. And for most of them, I think they went down initially and they leveled off. But it's something we have to look at, because the only way a water or a wastewater utility can pay the bills and keep the lights on is to collect the rates, and that's how we fund our operations. So it's complicated, it's a moving picture, and we just need to stay on top of it. Just briefly, as I finish up, just think about the value of water for a minute. Drinking water gives you public health, sanitation, fire suppression, and it is the basis for economic development. In the United States, we do it for about a penny per gallon. In other developed nations, it's a lot more expensive. And most people don't even know. I mean, obviously the people on this call understand, but most Americans don't even, they turn it on, it's there, they're happy. Doesn't turn on, then they call you. So I put this slide together in 2018 for part of our public outreach for a major bond issue that we were, for a major project we had coming up. And, it's specific for my utility in my area in the Mid-Hudson Valley, but I think it holds true for every drinking water utility. When you compare our rates, there may be some exceptions, to all of the other utilities, the cable, the heating oil, the cell phone bills, we're on an annual basis, we're far less expensive. So I think that needs to factor somehow into our affordability discussions. So the purpose of this slide is just to, this is work that was done in the first half of the last century. Improvements in water treatment really led to conquering waterborne diseases. Now they're still there, and we still have issues. Periodically they pop up, but that work in conquering waterborne diseases, we really don't deal with cholera and typhoid in this country anymore, thank God, has really led to an increase in life expectancy. And now we're on a new front. So we've done that. And now we're poised to begin dealing with these contaminants that we're finding, these organic compounds in our water. And I think, given the time, and if we find the money, I think we can do it. We'll be in another 50 or 60 years, and I know nobody wants to wait that long, but we'll be able to have these same types of graphs to show that we're able to do that. And the last thing I want to talk about really briefly. I know Adrian's probably, dancing around there. When is she going to shut up? We don't do a very good job of communicating risk to anybody. And this is just a quick slide, and I have to credit, Paul Granger and Hicksville for sending this to me. This is tap water is still relatively safe to drink despite the problems. Yes, we can make it better. Yes, we must make it better. But you still have less risk from organic constituents based on the MCL levels that are set, especially in New York, than you do from drinking the tap water than you do from driving your car to work. And we just need to figure out everything we do every day, there's a risk associated with it. When I walk out my office and I walk across the street, will I get hit by a bus? Well, I can mitigate that risk if I walk in the crosswalk, if I pay attention to the walk signs. We need to risk communication is a big piece. And I don't think as a water utility, as a water industry, and as the health department, quite honestly, we've done a pretty lousy job about that. So with that, I will be quiet, stop sharing my screen.
Okay, well, thank you very much to Matt Millay and to Judy. We always appreciate and we need your perspective. And look, we know that your challenges are vast and they are significant. So again, we appreciate what you guys do, and we appreciate the fact that you do it as professionals and really have dedicated your life to treating wastewater and also providing clean, safe drinking water. And so we are happy to be in partnership with you and to collaborate with you on these key issues. So what we're going to do now, folks, is because we are already over time, in my text message discussions with Julie and Jessica, one of the things we think would be a good idea is for the Clean Water Roundtable to schedule another Zoom meeting just with Clean Water Roundtable members to discuss the platform for 2021. This way we can, because honestly, I'm going to just be blunt, this forum, we got up to 75. You can't have a discussion with 75 folks. And while we appreciate and value everyone wanting to know about water, because why wouldn't you want to know about water? When we need to sit down and have the discussion about our platform and hash out what we want to agree on, I think, a smaller roundtable would be more fruitful and more productive. So Julie and Jessica have graciously volunteered to punt their discussion, which was deliberately crafted to set us up into our discussion about the 2021 agenda for the next Zoom meeting. So again, I want everyone, thank you so much for your participation. Dave Miller's got a question. Yes, we will discuss the meetings of the ADK Clean Water Report, Dave. And people can send in agenda items that you want discussed at the next Zoom meeting if you're a member of the Clean Water Roundtable. It is 12:41. I know a lot of you have a 2 o'clock meeting with the DEC, as do we, on the 1,4-dioxane implementation for in products. So I want you to have a little break to go have lunch.
Adrian, thank you. And thank you for your leadership.
No problem. We're happy to work with all of you guys because actually, honestly, it's the people on this Zoom meeting that really write and implement water policy in the state of New York. So you guys have done so much, all of us together over the last couple of decades, and we have a lot more to do. So thank you again, and I look forward to the next meeting. Bye.